Welcome to Biology My Passion. I am Soumya Harikrishna. Now we will start the first unit in biology, class 11, that is living world. So I have already published two chapters in biology class 11, respiration and also, that means not respiration, breathing and exchange of gases, which deals with the human respiration, and also I released the important chapter photosynthesis. And class 12 all chapters have been released. Now this chapter is actually an introduction to the classical biology, where we will be learning about the different systems of classification of plants, animals, microbes, everything. But today we will be dealing with the first chapter, which is actually an introduction to the rest of the three chapters. From smaller classes, you have been learning the differences between living things and non-living things. So here comes the question, what is living? So living things have certain characteristics, that they grow, they respire, they need nutrition, they react to an emergency situation, they respond to certain changes in the environment, they have metabolism, they reproduce. All these are characteristics of living things, and they have self-organization of their body also. But when it comes to non-living things, they may also share a few properties like this. So let us discuss the different features of living organisms one by one. So the first thing what we are considering is growth. We know that all living things grow, right? So usually growth means it can be measured in two terms. We can either tell in terms of mass or in terms of number. So when we are talking about mass, it is an intrinsic growth where the protoplasmic content of the cell is increasing. So ultimately the organism or the cell is growing. When it comes to number, it can happen due to cell division. So different organisms show different types of growth. For example, in plants, the growth is continuous throughout their life because meristematic cells are the specialized cells which help in growth because they are continuously dividing, adding new cells. But when it comes to animals, we cease our growth after a particular period of time. Then only repair and maintenance work will be going on. But what about unicellular organisms like amoeba or bacteria? For them, growth itself means increasing number by binary fission. So we can say that all living things grow, but when it comes to non-living things, do they grow? Suppose if you are considering increase in mass or number is the parameter for growth, you can see that certain structures like mountains, boulders or sand dunes, they can also grow in size, but there the materials are added externally, so that is called an extrinsic growth. So the basic difference we can say that in living organisms it is intrinsic growth, whereas in non-living organisms it is extrinsic growth. But since non-living organisms also can show some kind of growth, we cannot define the growth as a property of living organism. So it's not a defining property. Now the second property we can discuss is reproduction. We know that all living things can reproduce. Reproduction can be in form of sexual reproduction where two individuals are involved, or asexual reproduction where only one organism is involved. But when we are talking about reproduction as a defining property, we cannot say it is a defining property. Why? Because just now we saw in case of unicellular organism, growth and reproduction are kind of synonymous terms because they grow means they increase in number. That is nothing but the cell division. Cell division is a kind of reproduction. When we come to multicellular organisms, we can see that there are organisms which do not reproduce also. There are human beings who are not reproducing, they are not married, or there are married couples who are infertile, or they are not able to produce a progeny of their own. Or there are animals also which do not reproduce. For example, certain organisms in captivity or experimentally we make new species out of interspecies hybridization. Means we will be hybridizing two species of organisms. For example, donkey and horse, if you hybridize, you are going to get a new organism called a mule. But that mule is sterile by birth, it cannot reproduce. The same way in case of honeybee colonies, there are worker bees, they are females but they are also sterile, they cannot reproduce. But are they not living? Yes, of course they are also living. So we cannot say reproduction is a defining property of living organisms. Let's now discuss the next property of living things, that is metabolism. Metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical reactions happening within our body. It includes actually two types of processes. One is called a catabolism, second is called a anabolism. Catabolism is a breaking down process. For example, when I am consuming starch in my body, it gets digested into glucose. So that is catabolism. Whereas anabolism means what? When it's a building up process, or using many amino acids I got through my diet, I am making new proteins required for my body. That is a synthesis process, that is called anabolism. So sum total of all these reactions is called metabolism. So as long as metabolism is happening, we are alive. Once these reactions come to an end, our life will also end there. So the metabolism is a defining property of living things because it is not happening in non-living things. But there are certain very simple reactions which can happen within my body, that can happen in a test tube outside the body also. But we don't call it metabolism. It's just a reaction, chemical reaction, neither living nor non-living. But if it happens within the cellular organization, only then we call it as metabolism. So presence of cell or cellular organization and metabolism can be considered as a defining property of living organisms, because only living organisms can do metabolism. Then next, sensing our surroundings and responding to it. Living organisms only can do this, because if somebody is calling my name, I respond to that. Or if my mother is telling, take that book, I will take and give her, right? So it is a response to some stimulus from the environment. Or if suddenly an insect is coming, I'll move away. So that is also a response. So different ways we respond to the environmental changes. They can be in the form of physical changes, chemical changes, or biological changes, but still we respond. But again, though all living organisms are able to sense their environment and react or respond, but human beings have a very unique property that is called a self-consciousness, because other organisms are aware of their surroundings only, but human beings are the only organisms aware of the surroundings and aware of themselves. That is called a self-consciousness. So we can say responding to stimuli or sensing the environment and self-consciousness also can be considered as a defining property of living organisms, because these are shown only by living things. In order to learn about organisms around us, because we have a wide variety of diversity around us, so millions of organisms have been identified, and more than that not identified. So if you want to study them, if you study them one by one at a time, it's not going to help us, or we cannot finish it in our lifetime, because so many organisms are there around, plants and animals and small organisms, all these. So classification is the way which can make it easier. We make them into groups and study, that will be easier for us. So we are going to discuss who all made the attempts to classify organisms. So there are different types of classifications we come across in living world, but the pioneers in this field are the first one, Aristotle. Aristotle is a Greek philosopher. He is known as the father of biology. He was the first person to divide plants into herbs, shrubs and trees based on their size. And also animals he classified based on their habitat into the ones living in land or water or air. Next classification came from Charaka, who was actually from India, and he is known as father of Ayurveda. He tried to classify more than 200 kinds of animals and 350 types of plants in his book called Charaka Samhita. Next is John Ray, an English naturalist. He found the key systems to classify living things. Then finally, the major contribution was by Carolus Linnaeus, or we call it Carl Linnaeus. He is a major contributor in this field, and he is known as father of taxonomy. He actually classified almost 5,900 species of plants and also 4,200 species of animals, and he was the first one to introduce the binomial nomenclature system, where we are using two words to make a scientific name unifying different names for a plant and an animal. And another thing, all these were described in his book called Systema Naturae. So now in classification, the main branch is the taxonomy. Taxonomy is the process of classification of living organisms into different taxa. Taxa means different categories, singular taxon, plural taxa. Now, it actually deals with the identification and classification of organisms. So, taxonomy has the following steps: characterization, identification, nomenclature and classification. So, once you first find out an organism, whether it is a plant or an animal, the first step we have to follow is characterization. That means we study their characteristics in detail. Then, identification. Suppose we got the new plant or animal, we after characterization we find that they are identical with or similar to already existing or plant or animal. So that is called the identification. So we can put them in that group. Next is a nomenclature. Nomenclature is a scientific naming of organism, because we know that if we are using colloquial names of a particular organism or a plant, different regions they have different names. You know, in India itself we have lots of languages, so they may be speaking in different terms. So if I am telling about something, you may be also telling about the same, but we may not realize that it is the same thing we want to communicate about. So to solve this problem, internationally, a scientific naming system has been introduced so that wherever you go, the scientific name does not change. So next step after characterization and identification about its characteristic, we have to name that. Then we have to classify it. Classify it means grouping these organisms into different categories based on the characteristics that share. Means they may have similarities, so they all will be put in a single category. So these categories are named as a taxon. Now let us understand what is systematics. Systematics is derived from a word called a systema. In the systematics deals with the diversity and kind of living organisms, and also the relationship between the existing living organisms. So this was actually introduced by again Carl Linnaeus, and he had used this term in his book Systema Naturae. But here we are talking about the diversity of living organisms and the relationship among them. So some naturalists, they consider taxonomy and systematics as the same word only, but actually there is a slight difference. In taxonomy, what do? We study about the diversity of living organisms and classification, whereas here we are talking about diversity of living organisms and the interrelationships among them. Now we will discuss the importance of binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature is a unified system of naming. Suppose you want to name a plant, we have to get an approval from International Code of Botanical Nomenclature, and if it is an animal, we will have to get an approval from International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. But when Linnaeus started this process, he named many plants and animals using Latin words, and even now we follow that, and there are certain conventions that we have to follow while writing a scientific name. For example, if I write the scientific name of mango, it is Mangifera indica. This includes two names, so that's why we call it as binomial nomenclature. First name is the name of the genus to which this plant belongs to. It is a taxonomical hierarchy, we will learn about it. And indica is the species to which the plant belongs. So here two words, generic name and a specific epithet we say. Now while writing, if you are writing, then you have to underline these two words separately. And one more thing you have to remember, whenever you are writing the genus, it should be with a capital letter, and species name should start with a small letter. And if you are printing it, you are not writing but you are printing, it has to be in italics. You know that a slanting font is called italics. So these are the general conventions that you have to follow while writing this. Sometimes you will see after this L-I-N-N, Lin. This shows that this name was given by Linnaeus. So his name short form is given at the end. Like we have other names also. Human beings, the scientific name is Homo sapiens, right? Or coconut we say Cocos nucifera, rice is Oryza sativa. Many scientific names we will come across. What do you mean by 3 domains of life? Or we can otherwise call it as 6 kingdoms. It is with regard to the classification systems. Before 1969, we had been following the classification done by Carl Linnaeus. He classified all the living organisms into 2 kingdoms, plant kingdom and animal kingdom. But there were a few problems associated with this classification. About that we will learn in the next chapter. Then in 1969, Whitaker introduced another system of classification called a five-kingdom classification, solving all the anomalies associated with the two-kingdom classification. Here the five kingdoms were: first kingdom Monera, which included all the prokaryotes. Then comes a Protista, which included all the unicellular eukaryotes. Then came fungi. Fungus was considered as a separate kingdom. Then plant kingdom and animal kingdom. So totally he divided all the living organisms into five kingdoms. So we had been following it till 1990. But in 1990, Corvus remodified it. That means the five kingdom classification only, but in that Monera, as I told, consisted of the prokaryotes, means mainly bacteria. But he classified those bacteria into two categories: archaebacteria and eubacteria. Archaebacteria means the bacteria having the primitive qualities, means they can live in very harsh climatic conditions like in acids, hot thermal vents, and also in cow dung. All these kind of bacteria are put under archaebacteria, where other bacteria, normal bacteria existing in this present condition, are considered as the eubacteria. Eu means true bacteria. Then rest eukaryotes were classified as Protista, fungi, plantae and animalia. So total five kingdom became six kingdom because Monera classified into archaebacteria and eubacteria. Or domain, if you say, we can say archaea is the first domain, bacteria second domain, and eukaryotes the third domain. Hope you are comfortable with my lessons. If so, please like, share with your friends, and also subscribe if you haven't subscribed to it. Thank you for watching Biology My Passion.